podcast, we usually tell you about people. Most of our heroes are civilians because the Ukrainian military is currently busy with important things to do in the battles with the Russians. But sometimes we have a chance to talk with them. So today's episode is about soldier Serhiy Ogorodnyk. He recorded his story for us this summer. Now he has a chance to help with the deoccupation of the Kharkiv region and tell us about his impressions once again. Hi, my name is Catherine Litvinchova, and this is the second season of the podcast UA, The Day That We Survived. The war Russia has started against Ukraine is bearing down on the whole world. Food blockade, price increase, energy blackmail. This is just a part of the damage caused by the Russian Federation. We are telling the stories of real people who impress with their resilience despite the circumstances. And we kindly ask you to support our efforts as an independent media and a podcast platform on Patreon via the link in the description. In peacetime, Serhiy was working as a journalist in the non-governmental organization Chesno. A long time before the full-scale invasion, he was a part of the Kyiv territorial defense. He went on training every weekend. Territorial defense or teroborona contains separate troops within the armed forces. From the beginning, their main task was to protect cities from enemies. Teroborona now also serves on the front line. Serhiy is talking about the beginning of the full-scale invasion, his mission in Irpin city and the Kharkiv region.
Коли 24 лютого Росія почала
When Russia began a full-scale round of aggression on February 24, it basically continued the ongoing war since 2014. Well, I didn't have a question about where to go because before that, I'd had a contract with a territorial defense unit in Kyiv. My contract ended in July 2021. I did not continue it consciously because I knew I still had contacts and places to refer. I would come to the assembly point and there would be no formalities. Either I would make a new contract or it would go somehow. And so it actually happened on February 24. I didn't even consider any other options. I knew many good and reliable people who were going to serve and fight. And so I was eager to get into the same unit and fight side by side with them at any cost. On February 24, around noon, with the already packed backpack, which was yet packed incorrectly because I didn't take everything I needed. On the contrary, I did take everything I didn't need. I arrived at the assembly point of the 130th Regiment of Ground Defense of the Solonyansky district. At the time, the first company seemed already formed. The guys came out with weapons, some with their own, some with newly acquired ones. They were up to a combat task. It wasn't clear what the task was, where and how. Nevertheless, they were ready, lining up to move. The following companies were formed: the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th one, and so on. There were too many people. The whole parking basement at the regional state administration was crowded with people. Everything was done in emergency mode. Hurriedly, people received weapons, cartridges and packs, 4 magazines and a magazine pouch, an old Soviet one, to store these magazines. The magazines were loaded immediately, and you could shoot from a gun. Well, I was fortunate enough to enroll in the 4th company with my friends, after standing in line like everyone else. Some people shot more than once, and when the weapons or the lists ran out in the evening, people were sent home to spend the night. They came up on the 2nd day in the morning and stood in a long line again. Well, that's how it turned out to be. After some time, it seems that on February 26, the 4th company had already left the regional state administration and moved to where it was supposed to be in readiness. The place was called Kardachi, so my service in territorial defense started from there. It came up differently from what we've expected since 2019. The way we imagined territorial defense. These were people who were preparing for war, who were constantly training and who stayed in contact, knew each other, were aware of how to use weapons at least, and eventually formed units that defend critical infrastructure in the city, could be sent to strengthen the state border and stand at checkpoints. Those were almost all the functions. The good thing was probably that most of the people who came to receive weapons were decent, motivated volunteers. But the risks remained huge. In addition, people did not know how to use weapons yet. My friends and I stayed in the 4th Company for a relatively short time. We wrote the report and were transferred to the 1st Company. In fact, everyone knew that. With the 1st Company, almost immediately on March 24, we were sent to Irpin. Our units covered the flank of one of the armed forces brigades. The task was to detect the enemy's movement, restrain it if possible, transmit the coordinates to the artillery, and thus stop the enemy. Well, in fact, we just took turns going to combat positions, observed, hit from mines, deepened and improved the trench that was there. We finally waited until the enemy attacked us with artillery, packed up and left. So on April 3, we were sent home to Kyiv for a few days to rest. After that, the company was reformed and sent to Kharkiv. The staff personnel were cut a little, so some people ended up outside the company. For about a month, they either got used to the new teams in other companies or in general the other units they were sent to. In other words, there were attempts to adjust the company's staff structure and positions. In Kharkiv, the role of ground defense turned out to be approximately the same as in Irpin city. It seemed that more anti-tank weapons appeared. Well, those close combat type anti-tank hand grenades and similar things. But in essence, the role has not changed. Light infantry digs into the ground, hiding from the enemy artillery and waiting. Well, somehow so.
We have asked Serhiy for his opinion if everyone has to serve in the army.
To my mind, in those conditions where we appeared, the question of whether all men should go to serve in the army does not even arise because the answer is clear. It is necessary. People are different. They have different physical, moral, and physiological capacities. But at the same time, both the army and war are a big piece of work. This work is sometimes dangerous and always has some boring tasks to do. And basically, there's a job here for everyone if one only has a desire. For example, someone can perfectly organize supplies for the rear. It is also impossible without it.
Serviceman believes that everyone can find their place in the army. At the same time, he thinks that it is more difficult for women to serve.
If someone is an expert in a specific field in civilian life, their knowledge and skills might be helpful here in the same way. Yes, people don't always get into the unit where they can reveal their talents best, but after some time you can prove yourself in that place or transfer to another unit to find your place. It usually happens within 4 months. I believe that Ukrainians do not have a choice to serve or not to serve. The Russians put us in such conditions where we must defend our country or leave it. If you see your future in Ukraine, you will have to defend it. Because Russia does not see Ukraine on the world map at all. Just like that. Moreover, it is very difficult for women in the army. It certainly looks like not their place, but some exceptions show that women can also find their place in the military. For instance, in one company, there is a married couple, a man and a woman, who were mobilized without serving or fighting experience. They perfectly arrange food and various supplies necessary for the company. In other words, people have found a place where, like on Maidan, everyone can do something efficiently, quickly, perfectly, and beneficial. They found their business, and I don't know who could handle it better than them. There are also women who perform combat tasks, not worse and maybe sometimes better than men. But regarding the conditions of comfort and convenience, it is much more difficult when women are in the unit, but that is kind of normal.
Serhiy made all the previous recordings in summer, and now you're about to hear his new stories from the front. The armed forces liberated the Kharkiv region from the Russians in the first half of the year.
It is a really very enjoyable feeling to walk on the liberated land from where you were shot at just yesterday as it was occupied. These people who had such an experience, they are the very lucky ones. Of course, we walked carefully, looking around under our feet and through the bushes. Nevertheless, it is a feeling of relief and happiness. Of course, we did not meet residents on this track. It was a road with bushes on both sides. We were passing Russian positions. Their positions were very well fortified, seriously dug in and covered. The Russians seemed to be preparing to hold the defense steadily for a long time. They left a considerable supply of ammunition, cartridges in boxes, food, canned goods, anti-tank weapons, jet infantry, flamethrowers, mill, handheld anti-tank grenade launchers, and a lot of everything. It looked like they were gathering quickly, and the order to withdraw also took them by surprise. I assume that their junior officers and platoon commanders were not expecting they would withdraw. Later, based on the documents, we found out that the 80th Arctic Russian Brigade from the city of Alakurti, whose people were specifically trained, was standing opposite us. They were contract soldiers, a profound military unit that was well equipped. And in the trenches, we found elements of equipment, some abandoned backpacks and things of reasonably good quality. These soldiers were not naked or barefoot, as we usually hear about Russian soldiers, and it was actually very exciting to see how the enemy organized their everyday life. What struck me the most was that in each trench, Russians had a TV, a DVD player, and a TV with antennas, like they could not survive without a screen. Well, we didn't need all that. We communicate with the world through phones and the Starlink and can talk to our relatives. We don't need a TV at all, but we always find a TV in their trenches. Probably for their propaganda. Some children's drawings from the Belgorod region were also scattered there, and some printed letters from a local Belgorod poet. Russians didn't even read these letters, as they were folded into squares and pinned with paper clips together with an icon and St. George's ribbon, and were lying around. A significant amount of packs with icons. It seems they had some of their provisions being brought, and they shoved them in their dugouts under the ceiling into some crevices and crevices. They were probably unnecessary and not in demand. They gathered many things urgently and quickly left their positions. Maybe they did not take the belongings of their comrades who were not at the place at the time or were injured. These things were simply stored there. Whole backpacks were lying around, fully packed and abandoned. They drove very fast because we found a rather large package with TNT bombs and fire-conducting coils with detonators in one of the trenches. Obviously, they planned to mine all their positions, but either they were lazy or did not have time to do it. They just left it as it was. If we saw any suspicious object, we carefully examined it, trying not to touch anything. We also found a list of military personnel deployed to Ukraine, and when we took the main things, such as cartridges and various ammunition, we received an order to advance closer to the border near one of the settlements, so we went there. We settled near the border and controlled it from a distance, setting up a defense. Periodically, the Russians shelled the territory of Ukraine across the border. Unfortunately, these were not targeted attacks. They hit the woods around the village, some were in the fields. I repeat, fortunately, no one was hurt by these shellings.
Від цих обстрілів ніхто не постраждав.
Serhiy says that the Ukrainian military was welcomed in the liberated settlements. People complained that they were robbed and intimidated by Russians.
В населеному пункті, в який ми приїхали,
One retired woman came and complained that the Russians took their phones. She wanted to call her daughter in Kharkiv. Just in the Russian dugout, we found a looted Ukrainian cell phone, a simple one. And my comrade gave his spare card to this woman and gave her the cell phone so that she could call. She was delighted. She said that the Russians robbed them and stole the money they collected either for buying an apartment or from selling an apartment. Now I'm afraid to be incorrect, but the sum was significant. When the Russians came, they locked the owners in the kitchen for an interview. Meanwhile, others rummaged through the house, found money and stole it. And the whole village knows about this, as a matter of fact. Therefore, the residents greeted us. When we were changing positions while another unit was coming to our place, we stopped near one of the houses for a technical reason. Something in the car had to be replaced or we needed a pit stop, I don't remember. An old woman came out of the gate, saw us and asked, "Why? Are you already going?" I asked her not to worry about anything. We were just going on a vacation, which meant a rotation, and others would come instead. She was so emotional, and it was very touching. Clearly, the people did not want the Ukrainian army to leave their place. The locals told us that the Russians standing there, and that place was a border village, so actually the Russian there, those are Russians from distant Russian regions, not from Belgorod, but from somewhere in the Caucasus, the Urals, and there were police officers, Dagestanis. People were very wary of these Russian soldiers, they were terrified, which is understandable. Although there used to be normal relations between the border villages in Russia and Ukraine, some people have relatives in Belgorod, some in Kharkiv. But here, these ties were all broken. The war changed everything. People were afraid. When the Ukrainian army came to the village, people sighed in relief. It was palpable.
Люди зітхнули з полегшенням. Це було відчутно.
We are very thankful to Serhiy for his records and for his service. That was all for today. It was me, Catherine Litvinchova, and our UA, The Day That We Survived podcast. You can find useful links in the description to this episode. Stay safe and listen to Ukrainians. This episode was supported by Urban Space 100.